ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to move seamlessly on, I hope, to our final session of the evening, and it's one I am thoroughly looking forward to. We have Diana Rodgers joining us. I'm going to look quietly at the back to see if the technology is allowing us to hook up. We're not quite there yet, but I do have a fantastic biography for Diane that I would like to share with you. We're trying to hook up, just so as you know and understand why the technical difficulties might be there, with Boston, Massachusetts. So we do try and give you a variety of speakers, and that's the joy of the virtual world that we're currently in, that we are able to do so. So Diana Rodgers is a registered dietitian and is a real food nutritionist and sustainability advocate. As I've mentioned, she's from Boston, Massachusetts, and she's the author of 3 books, runs a clinical nutritional practice, and hosts a fantastic and spiky podcast called the Sustainable Dish Podcast, and has served as an advisor on the advisory board of numerous nutrition and agricultural organisations, including Whole30, Animal Welfare Approved, and the Savoury Institute. And she speaks internationally on the international stage on a regular basis about the intersection of optimal human nutrition and regenerative agriculture. She is the author of a very well-known book, which is The Sacred Cow, The Case for Better Meat, and is the director and producer of the companion film, The Sacred Cow. And her new initiative, a global food justice alliance, I'm being waved at, I believe we're hooked up, and advocates nutrition, sustainability, and equitable worldwide food systems, which we can all advocate. Diana, I'm so pleased to see you on the screen. That was the longest pen portrait introduction that I have ever done. Can I come straight to you, please, for your presentation? We are delighted to have you here with us at HCC this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you can see me okay.
We can. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Just one moment. Let me try that again. Okay, I think you can see this. So thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm sorry you had to wait, but I'm glad that I'm here. And especially glad because of right now what's happening with COP26, and I'll be able to address a little bit of that moving forward. So most people are looking at our broken food system and how are we going to feed the masses? And I'm looking at this from a different perspective. So I'm looking at what is the optimal diet for humans? And then how can we grow that in the most sustainable way? So it's a completely opposite way of looking at the problem. And the reason I called the book and film Sacred Cow is because a sacred cow, the definition is an idea, custom, or institution held especially unreasonably to be above criticism. So it's just assumed, for example, here in the town that I live in outside of Boston, people are very well educated. They're very concerned about the environment. Nobody is eating red meat here. Or if they do, they feel incredibly guilty about it. And to say that meat is a healthy thing to eat, or that cattle can be important for helping to mitigate climate change is blasphemy. I didn't get very much press at all for this book and film because of that. So beef and cattle are completely misunderstood and unfairly being targeted as the scapegoat for our concerns about health, our worry about climate change. It's much easier to pin all of our worries on something as powerful and polarizing as red meat than actually tackling the large, complex problems and really looking at this in a nuanced way. And I highly encourage you all to follow Frederick Lavoie, who made a brief appearance in my film. He is out of Brussels and does a lot of work in this space, kind of talking about meat as scapegoat. So what we're being told, of course, there's all these plant-based films out there pushing that meat causes cancer and heart disease. It's bad for the environment. It's unnecessary. Why eat meat when we can just engineer proteins in labs? It's, of course, unethical to kill beautiful animals when you can, in theory, not kill things to eat, which is, as you know, not possible. And also that plant-based proteins and lab meats are cleaner. And when I say cleaner, I don't just mean, you know, less bloody and dirty and sort of barbaric, which is how meat is positioned, but also cleaner in a spiritual way. There's this perception that, you know, those who are more enlightened, of course, have moved beyond the need to eat meat. These are pieces of propaganda from the Meatless Mondays campaign, which has taken over the New York City public school system, the largest school system in the United States, where 70% of the children are would qualify for a reduced fee school lunch. They're low income if they didn't just automatically offer free school lunch to all the children in this district. So you can see that they're saying here, global livestock production creates more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. That's not true. Decrease your chance of getting diabetes by about 15% by just skipping a serving of meat per day. That's not true. And also, we have this final one, keep your kidneys alive and, you know, don't eat meat. So meat consumption does not cause kidney disease. So none of this is true. But yet, not only are these kids being denied meat once a week, but they're being shown this false information about meat starting at about age 5 through 17 in all of New York. So this is incredibly damaging information, growing this movement of young people who are just really afraid to eat meat. We have some more aggressive groups. This is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is largely funded by PETA, taking out billboards, meat taxes for global health, why not tax meat? And you know, dump diabetes by not eating eggs. So there's no evidence that eggs cause diabetes, and a meat tax, of course, is absolutely ridiculous. It wouldn't take into account the production methods, just, you know, flat across the board. Let's tax red and processed meat. Could save billions of dollars in healthcare costs and millions of lives. This is not true. And then not too long ago, we had the United Nations Food Systems Summit. One of the diets that's being pushed through the UN right now is the Eat Lancet diet. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, this was a diet program that was commissioned by a Norwegian billionaire who is plant-based. She flies around the world in private jets, but then tells everybody else in the world that because of emissions, you should definitely not eat animal source foods, and then cites some erroneous facts here about why you should consume no more than 98 grams of red meat per week, which is really the equivalent of 1 blueberry's worth of beef per person per day, 2 blueberries worth of poultry today, each day. And so it's absolutely ridiculous, yet you can eat much more sugar than you can meat on this diet. And I forgot that I had also included this slide. So, you know, 1 blueberry's worth a week of meat per person per day, and, you know, only 1 ounce of chicken per person per day. So my issues with this diet and with the woman that is pushing this is that there's absolutely no research showing direct cause between red meat and disease. Most of the common nutrient deficiencies worldwide are iron and B12, and meat is the best source of these nutrients. B12 is not available at all through plant-sourced foods, and iron is not in the right form in plant-sourced foods. Meat is also highest in satiety, it's lowest in calories, It's the most bioavailable source of nutrients and protein. It's the most nutrient dense food available to humans. And so this has benefits not only for people who are malnourished in developing countries. And what we know is when people have more access to meat, they live longer, healthier lives. But also for people who are overfed yet undernourished. So the problems that we have in more Western countries, increasing protein will help them feel fuller for less calories. So they will actually lose weight when they eat more animal source proteins. And of course, from a food equity perspective, in many parts of the world, there is little to no access to the supplements or the variety of plants required for a diet like what Eat Lancet is pushing. And so this is one of the reasons I started a group called the Global Food Justice Alliance, which came as a result of the work that I was doing, spreading the information about the film Sacred Cow. The position of the Global Food Justice Alliance is that a vegan diet is a privilege that many do not have. I have over 100 academics, doctors, dietitians, and chefs who believe in this idea of food sovereignty. So allowing people to choose their own culturally appropriate diet that is produced in a sustainable way and regionally specifically. So pushing this plant-based diet is just not something that people have the privilege to do when they're looking for more nutrition, nor do people necessarily want to do this. And it may not be the right climate to be pushing a diet that's heavy in plants. So of course, trying to unpack all the criticisms of meat is sort of like playing a game of whack-a-mole. I don't know if you have that game in Wales, but it's basically, you know, you try to answer one question about methane and then they talk about water use or land use or killing beautiful animals or meat causes cancer. And so it's really complicated, and they'll come at you from a bunch of different directions. So the book Sacred Cow, I really try to go through this in a very logical format and dismantle all of the arguments that people have, and really trying to change that narrative that we have. So first of all, I tried to explain the health implications. So the World Health Organization has classified bacon as a type 1 carcinogen, so in the same category as cigarettes, and red meat as likely causes cancer, so in the same category as the Roundup herbicide. And the problem is your chances of getting lung cancer and other cancers from smoking cigarettes is about 30 times the average that, the regular person who doesn't smoke. With bacon, what they found was, the average person has about a 5% chance of acquiring colon cancer. And their research showed that if someone were to eat 5 slices of bacon per day, every single day for the entire rest of their life, their chance of getting colon cancer went from 5% to 6%, which statistically is completely insignificant. But the media, of course, glommed onto this, took that difference between 5% to 6%, rounded it up to 20%, and said your chance of getting cancer is 20% higher if you eat bacon. That's not really the same as a 30 times higher. So a 20% increase is not even twice the risk. Okay, so that's very, very different than cigarettes. And with red meat, there's absolutely no proof that it will cause cancer at all. The problems with nutrition research is that they largely rely on consumers to fill out food questionnaires to try to remember, in the last year, how many cheeseburgers did you eat? How many tacos did you eat? How many servings of shepherd's pie did you eat? Things like that. And people have been shown to lie on these food frequency questionnaires. They might remember the burger, but they might forget, or they conveniently forget, the sugar sweetened beverage, the deep fried apple pies and ice cream and all the other things that they're consuming with the burger. So on this table here, I would argue that the healthiest thing is actually the burger patty, not all of the other stuff that they're eating with it. But of course, it's the burger that gets blamed, and not all of the other junk food that's eaten with it. In addition, correlation is not causation. So just because one thing is associated with something else, it doesn't mean that that caused it. So here are two things that correlate pretty nicely with each other. So per capita consumption of chicken correlates with our crude oil imports in the United States, but that doesn't mean that chicken causes oil imports or that oil imports cause chicken, right? So it's the same kind of logic that they're using. Just because one population ate more meat than another population doesn't mean that it was the meat necessarily. It could be a whole variety of things that maybe one population did. So for example, in the United States, the Seventh-day Adventist religion is largely plant-based, and they have low incidences of cancer and heart disease, and they happen to be non-meat eaters in general. So compared to the larger population, they do have better longevity, but the thing is they also don't smoke, they don't drink, they have strong community and great access to healthcare. And so all of these things together should be considered, not just whether or not one population eats meat. So it's not the meat, it's what we eat with it, right? So again, the healthiest thing on this whole slide here is probably the hot dog itself and the burger patty. But people who tend to eat a lot of burgers and hot dogs also tend to eat a lot of these other foods. And so when they've looked at people that shop at health food stores, so therefore sort of taking into account the lifestyle, you know, people who shop at health food stores tend to exercise a little bit more often. They tend to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. You know, they just tend to be more health conscious in general. They found absolutely no difference in longevity between omnivores and vegetarians. And actually what they found was vegans have a shorter lifespan in this population. But of course, aren't we eating too much? Don't we all need to be eating less meat? So there's a perception, especially of Americans, that we're all sitting down to these gigantic, huge steaks that every single night. But actually in America, we're eating less than 2 ounces of red meat per person per day. So when I hear people say we're eating too much, we need to be eating less, my pushback is less than what? What is too much, and why do we need to be eating less when meat has all these great nutrients? It's an incredibly healthy food. It fills you up. It has low calories. You know, shouldn't we be looking more at sugar and processed foods as something that if someone is over consuming calories, they consider cutting down in? In America, over from 1982, I'm just moving my little bar here. From 1982 to 2012, you can see that our spending on meat has actually gone down by 10%, but our spending on processed foods and sweets has doubled. And when you look at our food consumption, between 1970 and 2017, that was the most recent data set I was able to get. What we can see is red meat consumption has actually gone down. Poultry consumption has gone way up, and that's largely due to cheap antibiotics and you know, really confined industrialized poultry production here. But our caloric sweeteners and processed foods and salads and cooking oils has gone way up. And so when we are vilifying red meat, all of the junk food out there, the things that are really causing problems for human health actually get a pass, and they're able to, you know, kind of slide in and not get blamed when we blame meat. So compared to beans and rice, I have a few slides here just showing why meat is superior. So first, we're going to look at protein. So 4 ounces of a sirloin steak versus 4 ounces of kidney beans. Total protein, 30 grams in the steak, 9 grams in the beans. And then you can also see all the different amino acids that you get. Plus there's 0 carbohydrates in steak versus, all the carbs that you would get in beans. In addition, you can see vitamin B12, which you cannot get from plant-based foods. In a 4-ounce piece of steak, you're at 95% of the daily recommended intake for vitamin B12, which again is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies worldwide. And the same serving in beans by weight just pales in comparison when we look at vitamins. And then minerals, you can see also that, zinc, selenium, and phosphorus are found in good quantities in steak, and the beans really don't give you much as far as minerals. So the beef wins on protein, on vitamins, and on minerals. And then when we get into the environmental case for meat, we can see that, cattle on grass, in general, the type of system that I advocate for, doesn't require chemicals, increases soil microbial life, rainfall absorption into the ground, cooler ground temperature, which is really important in areas that are facing desertification. You have better wildlife habitat. There's good bird organizations here in the United States that used to be very focused on conservation. So just like keeping everything pristine and not allowing any kind of agriculture practices at all in this conservation land. They're now realizing that they have to work with ranchers and they need grazing animals in order to keep these grasslands healthy and to keep habitat for migrating birds. So there's actually some bird-friendly beef that we have here in the US. There's less inputs required as far as outside, chemicals and fertilizers. You have a more nutritious product and a healthier ecosystem. And that's compared to extractive agriculture of monocrops, which actually is quite harmful for ecosystem function. And when you look at the price of these plant-based alternatives to organic grass-fed beef, so this is just walmart.com, I went online, it's almost twice as expensive per pound to buy these plant-based meat substitutes. You can see they creatively, though, sell their meat or their whatever plant protein in a half-pound package, as opposed to the beef, which is usually sold in a 1-pound package here. So it's half of the product, and that's how they make it look like it's competitively priced. And so one of my big arguments is just that meat is a real food and it's affordable, especially compared to all of these ingredients that you would get in these fake meat products. And when we're looking at meat being produced in a lab, there's absolutely nothing ecologically healthy about this at all. It takes large amounts of chemically grown monocrop, pick a monocrop, whether it's wheat, corn, or soy, in order to then bring that into a lab and use all of that energy to keep the temperatures regulated, the antibiotics to keep other pathogens out. It's just not economically feasible, and it makes no sense from an energy perspective. For those of you who are trying to talk to somebody who's relatively new to the idea that cattle can be a good thing for the environment, this is the argument that usually really has them kind of have an aha moment. Just pointing out that cattle can graze on land that we can't crop, that most of the agricultural land around the world is not land that we can just crop. And so therefore taking animals off the land doesn't mean that we're going to free up more land to grow beyond burgers, soy and corn and wheat. So, the UK is really, really good at growing grass. And so grazing is very, very appropriate for the landscape that you have there compared to cropping. Livestock can also turn food we can't eat into protein. So even, this is the global graph for livestock feed, and you can see that only about 13% globally of livestock feed is grains. The rest is things that are inedible to humans. So they can actually upcycle food that we can't eat into nutritious food that we can eat. And of course, only about 42% of the animal is edible, but we get so many other important products for industry out of animals, from cosmetics to, heart valves, insulin, every part of the animal's used. So when we're talking about food waste, there's actually much less food waste in animal production than there is in fruit and vegetable production. Water use is another area where a lot of people will criticize livestock, and it's important to know that the way you calculate water is very different depending on what type of water. So there's green water, which is like rain and moisture that's already in the grass. And then there's blue water, which is irrigation, lakes and streams. And so even in the US with typical beef, 94% of their water footprint is green water. So water that's going to be there whether or not the cow is involved, right? And with 100% grass finished beef in the US, the green water number is 97%, and only 3% is blue water. And of course, cattle urinate, and well-managed cattle can actually increase the water holding capacity of the soil. So when compared to avocados, walnuts, and sugar, cattle are actually more efficient with water than many of these other products. This chart just shows the difference between greenhouse gases from the cattle cycle compared to the fossil fuel cycle. So when you hear about the high emissions from cattle, and there was a menu that I saw from COP26 where they had the emissions next to all the menu items, and of course the local Scottish beef was like 36 times higher the emissions than the plant-based alternatives that they had on the menu. And that's really unfair because with cattle, they breathe out methane, yes, but after 10 years, that methane turns into H2O, water, and CO2, carbon dioxide. The water is then part of the water cycle, turning into rain, and the CO2 is taken up by the grass and other plants. The O2 is let go during the photosynthesis process, which is oxygen that humans need to breathe. And then the CO2, just the carbon, gets taken up by the grass. The grass becomes carbon, the roots become carbon, and the carbon is then dripped down to the microbes, which then actually eat that carbon, the little sugars, and exchange the sugar for nutrients that those roots need in order to grow. And up to about 40% of that carbon can be sequestered in the ground. So that is a beautiful cycle that is just not present when we're looking at the fossil fuel emissions, which should be completely looked at in a totally different way. So ancient carbon and methane are taken from the Earth's core, pumped into the atmosphere, and not part of a cycle. So that's just a one-way linear process. And so blaming cattle for climate change is, first of all, only 5% of global emissions are due to cattle in the first place. The largest number is definitely fossil fuels. But even with that 5%, it's a circular motion. It is not just pumping new emissions directly into the air. But unfortunately, the media doesn't understand this. And so all we keep hearing is, farting and belching cattle are destroying the environment. By the way, all of these graphics are available at sacredcow.info under Learn and then under Infographics. You can just share these as you'd like. So this graphic just shows the U.S. Methane emissions. These are broken into CO2 equivalents. So you can see that transportation, electricity generation, and industry are by far the biggest emissions. Cattle are about 2% of US greenhouse gas emissions. And so with the global numbers, the reason why we keep hearing that livestock are 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions is from a report, that Livestock's Long Shadow. And the flaw in that report was that they looked at the entire life cycle assessment for cattle. So if you look at the top here, it's like the cattle, the feed to the cattle production to then the processing and then transport to people's homes. So that's called the life cycle assessment. They did not do that for transportation. We don't have those numbers for transportation. So they were just looking at tailpipe emissions from, let's say, flying planes, driving cars, things like that. So when you do look at direct emissions, what we have is 14% of emissions are coming from transportation and only 5% are coming from livestock. So livestock is not worse as far as emissions than all of the transportation industry. That's just not true. There was a study done in the United States, and the credit is at the bottom of the slide here, and you can also get that from sacredcow.info. It looked at what would happen if we eliminated all animal source foods from the US diet. And what it found was that our greenhouse gas emissions would only decrease by about 2.6%, but it would have pretty bad health outcomes. So our calorie consumption would go up, our carbohydrate consumption would go up. So not things you want in a country where 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. And then we would have nutrient deficiencies that would get worse. So calcium, vitamin A, vitamin B12, and fatty acid deficiencies. So for the cost of 2.6% emissions, we would have dramatically worse health outcomes. And in the book Sacred Cow, I actually looked at what are the emissions of diabetes. So if you think about all the amputations, lost work, hospitalizations, there's a lot of emissions involved in all the plastics and all that hospital time that could be saved if we just had a healthier population. And so nature works in systems, and we need to be thinking about this from a systems perspective. So cattle can graze grass with the help of direct solar energy and rain, and then their manure can actually increase soil microbial life and help sequester carbon. Finally, I also get criticized sometimes for saying that, you know, meat or well-raised meat is elitist, but I did the pricing here in the US, and organic grass-fed beef is actually less expensive by weight than strawberries, popular coffee drinks, candy, cookies, imported specialty health food, berries, and vegan protein powders. And so that's the end. I tried to go quickly because I know you were running behind in time. So I think I have maybe, I can either help you catch up with time or, you know, we have a little more time for questions. So I will stop sharing. So you can find me at the Global Food Justice Alliance. That's globalfoodjustice.org. and it's Global Food Justice on Instagram and Sustainable Dish on Instagram. Good.
Thank you very much, Diana. Huge amount of food for thought, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions coming through online and there's questions in the room. So I'm going to start by throwing open to questions in the room, if I can. So who would like to ask Diana a question? Jack, if I could come to you in the front. Laura, I don't know, well, Laura or Heather, doing a great job on the mics tonight.
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation. I was just wondering if all the work you've done here, you're probably preaching to many of the converted. Have you made any difference to your local community where you said they were all vegetarians? Are you making an impact to the unconverted?
Well, that's a good question. I'm getting a lot of feedback from school science teachers that they're really grateful to have the film, because here in the US, a lot of the schools are showing these vegan films in science class as if they're actually science. And so the teachers are really grateful to have the film as a tool to spark conversation, which is one of my big goals for that. I am seeing through my social media channels a lot more, well, when I get pushback from somebody who's plant-based, I used to have to be the one on there to defend myself with all the talking points. And lately, I don't have to do that. The people that are following me know all of my talking points and are actually able to get in there and defend that. So that's really great. As far as, bigger picture, I am seeing a lot more people calling out a plant-based diet as elitist and something that doesn't honor, traditional foods and other cultures or people that are food insecure. So that's really good. And then from a policy perspective here in the US, there is a senator here whose chief of staff watched the film and read my book, and there's a regenerative grazing on public lands bill that I'm part of that is getting pushed through the government right now. So that's exciting.
Thank you, Diana. Can I come to Rachel, please, in the front row, if I could?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a question. Do you think there's a value in crossing carbon footprint with nutrient density, so people can perhaps see nutrient density value versus carbon footprint?
We absolutely need to be looking at, right now, the carbon footprint is by calorie or by pound of food, and it definitely needs to be looked at by nutrient density, especially nutrients that we're short on, and protein, which is the most important macronutrient. So definitely, and there are people out there that are starting to do that.
Thank you, Jenna. If I can take that one step further, we have a lot of rhetoric in this country about reducing meat consumption, but it's never connected with health. And how do we redress that disconnect between the nutritional need for a healthy, balanced diet and climate change? Because it seems to me at the moment that climate change gets priority over the need for a healthy, balanced and sustainable diet. And I think we need three prongs under the diet that we eat.
Yes, we definitely need the environmental people to understand protein and animal source foods contribution to overall nutrition status, because I do see, especially among millennials, that their environmental concerns are overweighing any nutrition concerns that they have. And that environment, they're just conveniently using whatever case from the environment they can find to justify their guilt about eating animal source foods. So we do need more health influencers understanding how to defend meat environmentally, and we need more environmentalists understanding the nutritional case. It's really, everyone's just siloed and talking about this in vacuums, and we need a lot more crossover. And I think there's way too many nutritionists that don't understand how to defend meat environmentally. And so they kind of shy away from really entering these discussions.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question that's coming online, and it says, ask, what are your views on the agreement to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030 at COP26? And that's coming from Crystal Williams from Bangor University.
From what I'm hearing about what's happening at COP26, and it's unfortunate that we all can't just be watching it, I don't know why it has to be closed like this, is that at the nation level, they're really talking about fossil fuels, but the media is talking about meat because it's a much more compelling story that people are going to open. They're going to click on it and they're going to read the headlines. We need more media that understand the puny contribution that livestock production even contributes to overall greenhouse gas emissions, and what happens, like that one study that I showed, which again, people can just take that graphic and please share it. If we pull back on meat consumption or eliminate it completely, it actually is going to make a very small dent in greenhouse gas emissions, but it will also lead to worse health outcomes.
So taking that one step further, how do we give ourselves a level playing field? Because meat is given a pass for the plant-based industry, and meat is also giving a pass to transport, energy and industry. We have it from both barrels. How do we get that level playing field back? What do we need to do, in your opinion, on a global scale, but also back here in Wales to actually redress that balance?
Changing this narrative is really hard because it's worse than like butter could ever have been, right? Because butter is only like going to make you fat and maybe cause heart disease, but meat is, killing the environment. It's killing beautiful animals, and it's going to kill us, right? So it's all of these things. One is to show, I think, meat as a real food. That's my opinion. Show the ingredients of these plant-based as ultra-processed food. That, being real is something especially young people want to identify with. So something that's real versus something that's fake. I would also try to really highlight the fact that the farmers are landscape stewards. And unfortunately, when industry says something, even if it's true, it's automatically not true because it's industry saying it. So I think that you need more heroes that are livestock producers and more health influencers that are defending meat nutritionally, and that they're educated environmentally. So I've been going around to farms here in the US, and actually I'm going to be coming to the UK, I think in May, trying to educate health influencers, bringing them to farms, explaining why nutrition research is so poor, how meat is actually, a healthy food, and also how it can be good for the environment. And so I just think we need a lot more non-industry people spreading this message, because one of the only few people that are actually out there defending it. And there's not a lot of money in defending meat. You get a lot of pushback. It's really time consuming. And so it's just an area that'll, it's tricky. And so a lot of people just would rather not have that conversation.
We've seen a lot of collaboration over the last sort of 12, 18 months. So HCC has been working with the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Beef and the Global Meat Alliance to try at a category level rather than at a brand level to tackle some of the myths and bust them and put forward the positive advocacy around health and environment. Do you think that's the right way forward on a global level? And what else do you think we can do to try and influence that message on the international stage?
Yes, I work a lot with the Global Meat Alliance as well, with the Global Food Justice Alliance. And I think that unfortunately, consumers aren't trusting media. And so it would be really, really important to have other people say the message that you need put out there. So you need scientists, you need dietitians, you need doctors, and you need health influencers. Those are who are trusted out there on social media, and doing this through social media is really the best way. And you know, also with press, trying to get them to the farm and trying to, you know, try to captivate interested reporters and get them to maybe dig just a little bit deeper than their assumptions.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, are there any more questions from around the room? I'm conscious that I've taken some online. Is there anybody from around the room that wants to ask any questions before we wrap the session up shortly? What I would like to do is ask just a couple more questions and bring it back to a very Welsh level. We're in a room of Welsh people and we are very passionate about our PGO Welsh beef and lamb brands. One of the things that we are embedding is our sustainability message in our branding. How else do you feel that we can advocate for our sector with our branding on both a domestic and an international scale? We're focusing our production techniques, our grass-based, pasture-based, non-intensive systems, but also on the health message. Do you think we are on the right track?
Again, if you are to push it as a real food grown by real people who, you know, have a rich heritage in Wales, I think that to me sounds like a really great idea. I know that in Norway, there was a campaign done by Matt Pratt, and I can try to follow up with the link, where right before films, they actually bought ad space where they were doing videos by young people talking about methane and why in Norway eating a plant-based diet doesn't make much sense because it's so cold, and they grow such great grass there, and how eating animal source foods is something, you know, very Norwegian. And so, you know, if there's a way that you can do a media campaign that's, you know, maybe incorporating young people, so talking to themselves, because that's really the group that is avoiding meat, or, you know, it's not really the vegetarians and vegans, it's those flexitarians that are really the ones that I would be concerned about. So it's the ones that are cutting down, that are choosing to buy plant-based substitutes instead of the real thing. So, you know, trying to get a kind of a guerrilla army out there of influencers, you know, from Wales that are talking to their people, using, you know, maybe traditional recipes or modern adaptations, but using real meat as, you know, really highlighting Welsh meat as the real ingredient that they're using.
One last question from the audience before we wrap. I can see, can we come to Terry in the centre, please? Heather, can you see Terry? If you can just wait for the mic, Terry, sorry. Thank you.
Should we not use, you know, sports people? Like, let's take a boxer then. I don't think a boxer would last 10 rounds if he wasn't having a decent steak. So don't you think we should use these sort of people to explain how they've got the energy to do that job?
So the question from Terry, if I can paraphrase, because I'm not sure that a boxer would entice me to buy meat, but in the general principle, when we take different categories, and you mentioned particularly the young people, how do we make sure we target the right message to the right age group to advocate why we should incorporate meat into a healthy, balanced diet, which is exactly what Terry was alluding to?
Exactly, I understand completely. So I think, you know, who are they respecting the most? It's internet influencers, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. It's you know, those people on Instagram that are posting recipes and diet tips. And so those are the people that I would try to get to promote meat, and again, meat as a real food. If you were to look at athletes, I would consider who are young women looking up towards, because it's women who are the ones that are more likely to, you know, try to get their boyfriends to go more flexitarian. I've found that young men will eat meat if given permission to eat meat, but they're getting pressured from young women to not eat meat. So in order to reach the young women, having female nutrition influencers, female doctors, talking about iron deficiency, which is so common in young women, getting your body ready to be, pregnant, talking about eating real food instead of fake food. All of those things really targeted at young women, I think, is the way to go, personally.
Fabulous. So the right advocate at the right level and at the right time. Wonderful. Can I ask if there are any final questions around the room or online before I do wrap up the session? Because we've got so much food for thought. It's been fantastic having you with us. I think we've probably exhausted. I think we all need to think really long and hard about the things we've heard this afternoon. We've heard about myth busting. We've heard about the need for sensible nutrition. And I think we all understand how we need to stop allowing those passes to be given to the plant-based industry and transport, energy and industry. Diana, can I ask you, thank you sincerely for your time. I know there's been a lot of work to ensure that we hooked up with you in Boston, Massachusetts at the right time, and I have no idea what time it is there, but thank you very much for joining us indeed.
Yeah, I know we were dealing with time changes at different times, but thank you so much. I'm happy to be a resource if I can be, and I look forward to coming to Wales in the spring.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Can I ask you to show your appreciation? Fantastic. So we've had a jam-packed afternoon, and can I thank you all sincerely in the room here in Bilth, but also online at home for joining us for the sessions today. We have had such a tremendous amount of information sent our way, but I end the day with a huge amount of positivity. Yes, there are challenges in the future, and we need to up the ante in terms of that positive advocacy of our sector, but we're doing so from a position of positivity and strength. Our fantastic PGI Welsh beef and lamb and pork from Wales, we know are some of the most sustainable ways that we can produce meat. We are ready to do more, we are ready to improve, and HCC as a stakeholder in your industry are ready to lead the charge and ensure that those brands have longevity and that we underpin the evidence behind the sustainability message further. So to those of you online, can I bid you a farewell and thank you for joining us virtually, both yesterday and today, for all of the virtual sessions. And for those of you in the room, I'd like to also thank you for joining us in person. We were incredibly grateful to have you here in person today and to have this hybrid event. Can I also sincerely thank the team at HCC and the executive behind the scenes. We challenged them as a board hugely this year to say we wanted to be in person here in Bilth if we could, and online, which doubles the workload. It was double the challenge. They've risen to it tremendously, and can I thank everybody behind the scenes for making today happen. I think it's really important to say that the sessions will be available to watch again via the HCC website next week, once we've done a bit of editing, tidying and brushing up. And can I encourage everybody that's attended in person today to fill in the feedback forms and leave the forms in the box on the exit or on their chairs, and we will collect them up. To anybody in either session, particularly the latter one, because I've chaired and compared it, if you've had a question that you haven't been able to ask because I've missed it or I haven't seen you, or I've been poor in my time management, I sincerely apologise. But if you pop your questions onto the feedback forms, we'll feed back to them via email and ensure we answer your questions in full.